This is Narratives of the First Testament, and today we are looking at Judges. This is Unit 14. We're really making our way through this paper. Judges, a book of positive and negative lessons. Part 1. Judges is an interesting book. It's full of all kinds of interesting themes. Tension and strife between rival groups, disputes over land and territory, uncertainty over the role of men and women, power-hungry political leaders, child abuse, senseless and excessive violence, male political leaders who chase women. I wonder who that could be. Mass murder. Excessive individualism, moral confusion, and social chaos. This sounds like just about any day and any news broadcast coming out of the United States, not New Zealand. We're much too boring. Structure of the book starts with a prologue. Prologue overlaps with the material from Joshua. Some of it gets repeated. We get sort of a summary, and we get this incident at Bochim, where a prophet comes and basically chastises the people because they haven't done what God told them to do, and the people weep. That's why it's called Bochim, which means in Hebrew weeping. The bulk of the book, chapter 3 through chapter 16, are a series of 12 judges. Actually, only about 8 of them have stories attached to them. Some of the others we know only by name. And then at the end of the book, we have another of these famous double epilogues, just like we found in Joshua and just like we found in Leviticus, with the story of Micah and the Danites, and the story of the Levite and his concubine or secondary wife. 6 times we're told in the book that Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and each time it introduces a major time of oppression. Let's look at an overview of the book. We've got these are the basic stories. We've got Achsah. Now the story of Achsah rocks. I'll talk more about it in a minute. Then we get the weeping at Bochim, which I've already mentioned. Then we got Onethiel. He's the first of the judges, and he's Achsah's husband. Then we have Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Japheth, Samson, and then the 2 stories that I've mentioned. This is the overall pattern of the book. So what's the message of the book? Well, there's a downhill trend in the book. It's pretty obvious. Things start off relatively well, and they go seriously downhill. Gideon is the last of the good judges, but you might be surprised to hear that he's also the first of the bad judges, because there are bits of Gideon's story that we generally don't include when we tell it in Sunday school. And the second half of his story is really not very good. He does some remarkably cruel things to some Israelite villages, and he ends up making an ephod. And there are lots of reasons that he might have made an ephod, and to be frankly honest, none of them go anywhere good. The people want to make him king, and he refuses to be king, but then he starts acting like a king. In fact, his son, just to clinch the deal, is called Abimelech. And Abimelech means my father is king. So Gideon really did start to act like a king. Towards the end of the book, we get the accounts of Samson and Japheth, which are what we call terror tales. And then we have these 2 incidents which are just absolutely horrendous and awful, and sound very much like Sodom and Gomorrah. We're supposed to throw our hands up in horror and say, how can this happen in Israel? It starts off well, it ends up badly. Onethiel. Onethiel is the son of Kenaz, who is Caleb's brother. That means he's Caleb's nephew, and he is royalty. He ends up marrying Achsah, and you know the story how she's been given a plot of land and she wants water to go with it, so she asks Oneithiel to go and intercede to get water, and Oneithiel won't do it. So the Bible says that she went in and she rode a donkey and she got off her donkey, and the word is really interesting here, because the word that's used of her getting off her donkey and moving forward is the same word that's used of an army. This is a scary woman. This is a woman that you do not mess with, and she is going to inherit, and she is going to get what she wants, and she is seen as a major character. It's really, really good. Oneithiel is everything you expect in a judge. In fact, he is the model judge. He's the one that does everything right, and he's the one that then we're supposed to compare all the following judges with. Interestingly, he's the only judge from the southern kingdom. He's Judah, and perhaps the reason for that is that it's only Judah and Benjamin that really do take the whole of their land and seem to actually have succeeded in getting rid of the Canaanites. He's the kind of person you expect to be a judge, and Israelite royalty. And after his judging, Israel gets 40 years of peace. 40 years as a generation, and you'll discover that Eli reigns for 40 years. Saul, David, Moses, Solomon, Josiah, they all lead for 40 years. The next judge, we discover that after Oneithiel, the children of Israel do evil in God's sight, and the Midianites come and oppress them. The Moabites, the Amorites, and the Amalekites, they form a coalition and they come and oppress Israel, and basically Israel has to bring them tribute. That means tax, and they have to bring it to the city of palms, which is Jericho, and they bring it. They're taking it one time, and there's Ehud. Ehud means one. And it suggests he's acting by himself, and that's certainly the way it reads. It really sounds like he's come up with this plan all by himself. I love Ehud. The oppressor is called Eglon, and Eglon sounds like the Hebrew for round calf, and he's called that because he's evidently overweight. Now there's a bit of a joke going on here, because Ehud is left-handed, and he takes a sword and he straps it to the inside of his leg, and we assume that he gets away with this because they didn't check that side, because they expect him to be right-handed and they expect the sword to be on the other side, so they don't notice the sword that's hidden. But what tribe does he come from? Well, he's a Benjamite, and Benjamin means son of my right hand. So Ehud is the lefty from amongst the righties. It's supposed to be funny. And after they've given the tribute, he says to Eglon, I have a word from the Lord for you. Now, just as a rule of thumb, when anyone says that to you, run a mile. And it's got to be given privately. So they go inside into a private room, and Ehud says, here's the word of the Lord, pulls out his sword, stuffs it into Eglon's gut. The guy is so fat that the sword disappears into his stomach, and the fat closes over the outside, and Ehud, as cool as a cucumber, walks out, closes the door, and leaves quietly. It says his servants waited, and to the point of embarrassment, thinking he was on the toilet. Then they go in, of course, find him dead, and Ehud blows the trumpet, summons Israel. It would appear this is an off-the-cuff thing, and they fight against the Moabites and Amorites and Amalekites, and they win. And Ehud calls out the Ephraimites, and they take the fords of Jordan, and they prevent the enemy from escaping, and it's really, really good. The next judge is a guy called Shamgar. Now, remember we talked about these Haborim? Shamgar is not a Jewish name, and he is the son of Anat, and Anat is a Canaanite deity. So we're kind of figuring out that Shamgar isn't Jewish. He's ascribed to the tribe of Levi. Now, what happened to the Gibeonites? Oh, yes, they got to do the Levites' job, didn't they? So that's presumably why he's attributed to Levite. And he really only gets one verse. And in that verse, he takes an ox goad and he kills 400 Philistines. First reference to Philistines, although there's a big school of thought going back to rabbinical days that suggests that this particular story is actually out of order, and some of the manuscripts have it a little bit later in the book. The bottom line is, Shamgar is supposed to be pointing the finger at Samson, because Shamgar manages to do in one verse what it takes Samson a whole heap of drama, not suggesting Samson was a drama queen, and 4 chapters to do, and he's not even Jewish. He too saved Israel. And you get Deborah, and Deborah is also a judge. Now think about this, because who have we had as judges so far? We've had Onethiel, who is the relative of Caleb, and he's famous. I mean, he's everyone you expect to be a judge. And then you get the lefty from amongst the righties, the outcast, the odd one out. And then you get the foreigner, the one, the Canaanite, the one who's not even Jewish. And now you've got the woman, and you just never know who the next judge is going to be. This is a radically egalitarian society. And Deborah is sitting under a palm tree, and she is judging Israel. Deborah means bee, Devorah. It comes from the word devar, which means word, which is Deuteronomy, the name of Deuteronomy, and this is all really, really clever. There are lots of people that do not want to count her as being a judge because she's a woman, and you can't have women judges. But the same words are used of her that are used of any of the other judges. In fact, more is said of her, because not only is she a judge, but she's also a prophetess. And it's not until Samuel comes along that we'll have another judge that can say that. And Jabin the Canaanite from the plains, who's got iron chariots, has been causing Israel grief. And Deborah goes to Barak. Barak in Hebrew means lightning. So this is the kind of guy that you expect to be sort of, really impressive, and tells him he's got to go and fight Jabin. And Barak says, I'm too scared, and I'm only going if you come with me. And it's sort of the guy that's supposed to be lightning and isn't, it's again supposed to be funny. And Deborah says, fine, I'll come with you, but as a result it will be a woman that takes credit for this battle. Now that's not Deborah, that's Yael. And the opposing general, Sisera, he ends up running away from the battle when they're defeated, and he hides in Jael's tent. And Jael offers him milk and tucks him into bed, presumably reads him a story as well, waits till he's asleep, then takes a tent peg and drives it through his head. There's clever stuff going on here, because Deborah is the good mother. She's the mother in Israel. That's how she's described. And Yael is the bad mother, the one that feeds and puts to bed and then kills, but does this in obedience to God. And she's got every reason not to do this if you look into the story, and yet she still does. And then you get Gideon, and again you've got the divine warrior behind this, and this idea that actually it doesn't require a huge number of people. I love the story of Gideon. Fear of the Midianites, and he's threshing wheat in a wine press. Now I don't know whether you've watched Monty Python. Most of you guys are probably too young to watch Monty Python. You can't thresh wheat in a wine press. It's just not a goer. I mean, when you thresh wheat, you do it on top of a hill. You need wind and you need space. Wine presses are in valleys, and they're small and they're confined. And the idea of trying to thresh wheat in a wine press, it's bizarre. And you kind of get the impression that the only reason that he's there is because his mother told him to go. And he's doing this in fear, and along comes this angel of the Lord and says, Gideon, mighty warrior. Now, if there was ever a man in the Bible that was not a mighty warrior, it was Gideon. He's the least of the least, and he's hiding for fear. And it's amazing, because God sees who he really is, sees what's on the inside. I wonder what God says about you. I wonder if it's the same about what everybody else says about you. and he pulls down the idol to Baal, which the Israelites are worshipping. And he gathers all Israel together. 10,000 people come out, 22,000 people come out. They follow the rulings from Deuteronomy and send home anybody who's scared or who's just got married, or any of the exemptions that you have in military service. 10,000 are left. Then you have this bizarre thing where they lack water, and only 300 are left. And with 300, he defeats this huge Midianite army, which cover the land like locusts. I've already said the story turns a little bit bad towards the end. And in fact, Abimelech tries to set himself up as king. He does so with the help of Shechem, and then he fights against Shechem. They fall out, and a woman drops a millstone and kills him. At the end of the Gideon account, there's also an incident with Ephraim and the fords. And at the end of the day, Gideon calls out the Ephraimites, and the Ephraimites say, "Why didn't you call us out earlier?" And Gideon says, "Oh, mate, I come from a little tribe. The gleanings of your grape harvest are greater than our entire harvest. I'm nothing. You guys are amazing." And civil war is narrowly averted. There appears to be a spread amongst the judges, the 12 judges. It seems like there's a deliberate attempt to have them come from as many tribes as possible. Abimelech is included in there, even though he is evil. Of course, these are not the only judges. Eli was a judge, and Samuel was a judge. In fact, arguably, Samuel was the best of the judges. The best king Israel never had, to be frankly honest. But there's another judge in the book, because God is described as a judge in the book as well. I wonder who that could be with the lion. No idea. Maybe we'll figure it out later. That is the end of part 1.